The bullet was never meant for him yet. As the shot rang out, he leapt without hesitation, throwing himself into the line of fire, saving the one who had once saved him. In the dim, burning wreckage of a forgotten warehouse, two broken souls found each other again, not as enemies, but as something closer to brothers. They called him Ghost, a legend whispered through the ranks, a shadow who had seen too much and survived even more. No one knew where he came from. No one knew how he kept coming back. Only that when everything else fell apart, he was the one who never left. This is not just a story about a man on the run. It is the story of the one who ran with him, fought for him, and in the end, taught him what it meant to stand for something greater than survival. A fallen biker, a forgotten war dog, a bond that refused to die. Before you judge, before you think you know what loyalty looks like, you need to see how far one soul will go to protect another. Watch closely. Every scar tells a story. Every betrayal leaves a mark, and some debts are paid not in blood but in redemption. If this first glimpse pulls you in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. What moment do you think changed everything? And where are you watching from? Your story starts here. The rain fell in dense diagonal sheets, blurring the edges of the cracked asphalt under the blood-red sky. Jake Blaze Bennett tightened his gloved hands on the handlebars of his Harley, the roar of the engine harmonizing with the low growl of thunder rolling across the heavens. Every muscle in his body was tense, tuned to the rush of wind slicing against his leather jacket, to the tremor in the road whispering warnings he was too stubborn to heed. The highway ahead twisted and dipped through the foothills like a serpent under siege. But Blaze didn't slow down. He leaned into the speed, hungry for the numbness it gave him, for the way it silenced the memories clawing at the back of his mind. Tonight there was no destination, just movement, just escape. The world narrowed to a tunnel of rain, chrome, and rage. Then, without warning, something leapt into the road, a flicker of motion, a human shape pale and skeletal against the darkness. Blaze jerked the handlebars violently, instincts screaming too late. Tires lost grip on the slick pavement. The Harley fishtailed, a savage arc of steel and fury before slamming sideways into the unforgiving ground. The impact tore him from the bike, sent him flying. For a few heartbeats, he was weightless, a marionette severed from its strings. Then came the brutal kiss of earth against flesh and bone. Pain detonated through his body, sharp and raw. Somewhere in the maelstrom of agony, Blaze heard the Harley grinding across the asphalt, a shriek of tortured metal, before it exploded into flames. The world flipped and blurred and twisted. Colors bled into one another, gray road, orange fire, black sky, and then faded into a suffocating darkness. Lying broken in the middle of nowhere, rain seeping into the wounds he could no longer feel, Blaze's mind drifted into that strange, weightless place between life and death. There, in the dim half-howl of his fading consciousness, something moved toward him, heavy footfalls splashing through puddles, the low growl that vibrated in the very air. Through the haze he saw it, a massive German shepherd, sloped to the bone, its eyes burning like twin embers. But there was no comfort in that gaze, no rescue, only raw, simmering hatred. Blaze's heart lurched against the cage of his broken ribs. Somewhere deep inside, a forgotten fear curled itself awake, whispering of sins that refused to stay buried. The dog drew closer, each step measured, almost ritualistic. Its fur bristled, hackles raised high. Its jaws parted just slightly, revealing sharp teeth that gleamed under the flash of distant lightning. For a terrifying moment, Blaze was certain the animal would tear him apart, that this was not a rescue but a judgment. He tried to speak, to plead, but only a wet, ragged gasp escaped his lips. The German shepherd stopped inches from his battered face. It studied him with an ancient intelligence, as if weighing his worth and finding it wanting. Then, in a sudden, jerking movement, the dog grabbed the collar of Blaze's jacket with its teeth and began to drag him, inch by agonizing inch, away from the flaming wreckage. Blaze fought to stay conscious, to understand. Why would a creature that hated him save him? What kind of twisted justice was this? His mind spiraled, disoriented, until a more primal fear drowned all reason. Because that dog, no matter how impossible, was familiar. It was a ghost dragged from the ashes of his past, wearing fur and fangs and an oath not yet forgotten. The last thing Blaze saw before darkness took him again was the glint of a battered, tarnished canine badge dangling from the dog's collar, swaying with each desperate tug. And then there was nothing but the endless roar of the storm swallowing the world whole. The rain hammered down in a relentless cascade, drenching the broken highway and hissing against the flames devouring what was left of the Harley. Blaze's senses clawed their way back from the blackness, dragged by the sting of cold water splattering his face and the savage, undeniable scent of burning oil. His body screamed in agony with every twitch, but it was a different sensation that jolted him into partial awareness. A pulling, a jerking at his jacket that wrenched his battered body inch by inch across the slick asphalt. Disoriented, Blaze opened his eyes, or tried to. The world swam in fractured colors, bleeding red and orange from the fire smeared black from the night. Then through the veil of rain and smoke, he saw it again, the dog. It wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't a trick of his dying mind. A massive German shepherd was dragging him away from the inferno, its teeth locked firmly onto the collar of his leather jacket, muscles straining with determination that seemed almost human. Blaze coughed, choking on the acrid air, his limbs feebly thrashing against the pole. But the dog refused to release him. It yanked harder, step by agonizing step, its claws scraping desperate tracks into the rain-slick road. The fire behind them cracked and popped, showering sparks into the air like tiny, malevolent stars. A twisted part of Blaze's mind noted absently that if the dog hadn't intervened, he'd be a charred corpse by now, another lost soul swallowed by the endless night. Reality asserted itself in brutal slashes of sensation. The searing pain of broken ribs grinding against each other, the sharp sting of gravel embedded in raw skin, the numbing cold of the rain plastering his hair against his forehead. Blaze's breathing was shallow, rattling in his chest, but he forced his head up, needing to see, needing to understand. The dog tugged him a few more precious feet, then finally released the jacket, panting heavily, its powerful body heaving with effort. It stood over him like a sentinel, eyes locked onto his with a gaze so piercing it seemed to strip away the layers of bravado and bitterness Blaze had worn like armor for years. In the flickering firelight, Blaze could see more details now, details that made his blood freeze in his veins. The dog wasn't just any stray. Its coat, though muddy and rain-soaked, bore the unmistakable tan and black patterning that marked the elite breeding of a service canine. Around its thick neck, partially obscured by tangled fur and mud, hung a collar worn smooth by years of use. Attached to that collar was a tarnished, battered badge, its surface scratched but still legible under the flashes of lightning. K9 Unit, Police Division. Blaze's heart slammed painfully against his ribs. His throat closed up not from injury but from something far more primal, recognition. Fear twisted in his gut, cold and sickening. He had spent years trying to forget that insignia, trying to outrun the ghost of a night when blood and betrayal had rewritten the course of his life. And now, impossibly, it had found him again. The dog lowered its head. Blaze flinched instinctively, an old reflex born from too many years of mistrust. But the shepherd merely sniffed him, inspecting, confirming, almost. That night had ended in blood, cuffs biting into his wrists, and the long, slow descent into the life he had built from ashes. Now here it was again, standing over him like a grim avenger. But instead of attacking, it had pulled him from death's door. Blaze didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or simply give up. His lips moved, forming words that barely made it past the ruin of his throat. "Why, you—" The dog tilted its head slightly, ears pricking forward, as if trying to comprehend the broken fragments of his voice. Blaze tried to push himself up but only managed to roll onto his side, groaning as the world tilted nauseatingly. Somewhere in the distance he heard sirens, their wails rising and falling, carried by the wind. The dog's ears twitched again, this time in recognition of something beyond Blaze's perception. Without warning, the shepherd moved behind him, positioning itself behind Blaze and the approaching sounds, body tense, tail low but not tucked, a soldier bracing for a second battle. Blaze blinked against the rain, trying to understand. The dog wasn't just saving him, it was protecting him. For the first time in what felt like centuries, a fragile, ridiculous thought surfaced in Blaze's mind. Maybe he wasn't as alone in this world as he believed. Maybe, just maybe, redemption didn't always come with sirens and handcuffs. Sometimes it had 4 legs, a scarred badge, and a heart that remembered even when the mind tried to forget. Another flash of lightning seared the sky open, briefly illuminating the blacked-out remains of his Harley, the twisted wreckage smoking like some slain beast. Blaze coughed again, tasting blood this time, and struggled to sit up, cradling his shattered ribs. The German Shepherd turned its head sharply toward him, eyes narrowed with an intensity that pinned him to the spot. They stared at each other, 2 wounded relics of battles no one else could see. The bond was fragile, brittle, spun from equal parts recognition and regret. And just as Blaze opened his mouth to speak, to thank or curse or confess, the first police cruiser screeched around the corner, headlights slicing through the storm, tires screaming against the soaked pavement. The Shepherd didn't flinch. It remained rooted, a silent wall of fur and muscle shielding Blaze from whatever came next. Blaze squinted through the glare, heart hammering, instincts roaring awake, telling him to run, to fight, to disappear. But his broken body betrayed him, and all he could do was watch, breathless, as the doors of the cruiser swung open and black uniformed figures spilled out into the night, weapons drawn, faces hidden behind mirrored sunglasses and rain-soaked hat. The German Shepherd growled low, a sound of warning, of defiance. Blaze's breath caught in his throat. He knew this wasn't over. Not even close. And somewhere, deep within the tattered remnants of his soul, he realized with a shiver that the dog knew it too. The rain throbbed against the pavement like a drumbeat from hell as Blaze forced his battered body onto his elbows, coughing up a mouthful of rainwater and blood. His ribs screamed in protest. His vision flickered at the edges, but something primal, stubborn, and furious inside him refused to let him stay down. Gritting his teeth, he clawed at the asphalt, dragging himself into a shaky crouch. The German Shepherd shifted instantly, moving to brace him with a strong flank, steadying him with the quiet authority of a soldier who had weathered too many storms. Blaze leaned on the dog for a heartbeat longer than he liked to admit, his breath coming in shallow, ragged pulls. Somewhere beyond the pounding in his ears, a new sound cut through the storm, the rising wail of sirens, sharp and urgent, slicing across the hills like knives of sound. Blaze's heart lurched, muscles locking instinctively. His head snapped toward the noise, eyes narrowing against the blinding glare of oncoming headlights. More cruisers now, black and white beasts emerging from the mist, engines roaring, tires throwing up curtains of water as they tore down the broken highway toward him. He felt it before he even saw it, the inevitability. The news. Panic scratched at the walls of his mind, old instincts roaring awake. Run, hide, fight, anything but surrender. He staggered to his feet, adrenaline overriding agony, his boots slipping on the slick surface as he tried to move, tried to think. The Shepherd barked once, sharp and commanding, herding him away from the burning wreckage toward the tree line. Blaze didn't argue. He limped forward, muscles trembling, vision swimming, every step a small war against gravity and pain. As he stumbled into the shadow of the trees, he glanced down at his unlikely savior, still pressed against his side like a living shield. The dog was soaked, mud splattered across its coat, but it moved with a precision, a readiness that was almost unnerving. In the strobing flashes of lightning, Blaze caught a clearer glimpse of the battered collar around the Shepherd's neck. His heart stuttered. There, dangling from the cracked leather, was a brass name tag, dulled by years of wear but unmistakable even through the rain. K9 Division, Eastbrook Police Department. Blaze's blood turned to ice. Eastbrook. The name hit him like a fist to the gut, knocking the breath from his lungs. He knew that department, he knew it better than he wanted to. It was Eastbrook PD that had ambushed him years ago, stormed into that derelict warehouse and shattered what little future he had left. It was Eastbrook PD that had unleashed a German Shepherd just like this one upon him, dragging him down, slamming him into the cold concrete as handcuffs bit into his wrists. He had fled from that past ever since, leaving behind a trail of mistakes, regrets, and half-forgotten promises. And now fate had seen fit to circle back, to spit the same badge into his lap on a night already soaked in fire and blood. Blaze staggered, the realization hitting harder than the fall from his bike. His gaze locked onto the dog's face, those intelligent, relentless eyes, the square cut of the jaw, the stubborn set of the body. Was it possible? Could this be the same animal, the same warrior spirit that had once tackled him into the dirt and ended the last chapter of his life? The dog didn't seem to share his hesitation. It nudged him forward with a grunt, urgency radiating from its every movement. Blaze stumbled into a jog, his legs screaming in protest, but he pushed forward anyway, following the shepherd deeper into the woods as the sirens grew louder, closer. Surrounding them, the cruisers screeched to a halt, doors flying open, boots hitting the ground, shouts echoed through the rain, sharp commands carried by the wind. Freeze! Hands where we can see them. Flashlights cut jagged paths through the darkness, sweeping over the smoking wreckage, slicing into the edge of the trees. Blaze ducked instinctively, heart hammering, breath coming in ragged gasps that tasted like copper. He wasn't ready for this. He wasn't ready to be dragged back into that cage. Not again. Not now. The shepherd barked sharply, drawing his attention, and when Blaze looked down, he saw something that stopped him cold. The dog wasn't just leading him blindly through the woods. It was following a path, an invisible line etched into the earth by memory and instinct. A way out. A lifeline. Blaze gritted his teeth, willing his broken body to move faster, to trust the beast that had once been his captor and was now his only ally. They crashed through the underbrush, mud sucking at their boots, thorns clawing at exposed skin. Behind them, the flashlights multiplied, beams crisscrossing wildly as the officers spread out. Hunting. Suspect on foot! Suspect on foot! Requesting backup, a voice barked through the crackle of a radio, urgent and sharp. Blaze cursed under his breath, pain flaring in every joint, but he kept moving. He didn't know where the shepherd was leading him. He didn't know if this was a rescue or another trap, another cruel twist of fate. All he knew was that stopping meant capture, and capture meant an end he wasn't ready to face. The woods thickened around them, branches weaving into a near-impenetrable canopy that swallowed the light and muffled the sounds of pursuit. Blaze stumbled, nearly fell, but the dog doubled back, bumping his shoulder into his thigh, guiding him onward with relentless determination. For a fleeting moment, Blaze felt the strangest surge of gratitude, raw, bitter, desperate. Ahead, through the tangled darkness, a faint glimmer of light beckoned, yellow and soft, different from the harsh beams of the flashlights. Blaze narrowed his eyes, focusing through the blur. A structure, a cabin, salvation, or another dead end. The shepherd picked up speed, weaving through the trees with a grace that belied its size. And Blaze followed, his battered heart pounding, lungs burning. Behind them, the shouting grew more frantic, the chase gaining ground. They burst into a small clearing just as another crack of lightning tore the sky apart, and what Blaze saw made his heart seize in his chest. Blaze stumbled into the clearing, his boots skidding on the slick, muddy earth, his heart a war drum pounding against his ribs. The shepherd slowed only slightly, ears perked, nostrils flaring as it scanned the perimeter with professional precision. In the center of the clearing stood an abandoned ranger cabin, its wooden frame sagging with rot, windows boarded haphazardly, a single lantern flickering weakly by the front porch. For a breathless moment, hope flared in Blaze's chest, sharp and dangerous. Shelter, a chance to breathe, a chance to think. But as he staggered forward, half dragging himself up the creaking porch steps, another force slammed into him, an ambush not of flesh and blood but of memory. His body froze, muscles locking against an invisible blow, as a shard of the past drove itself mercilessly into his mind. It was a night just like this one, rain pounding against rusted tin roofs, police sirens wailing through a dying industrial district, boots pounding behind him as he fled through broken alleys and sagging chain-link fences. And then a flash of fur and fury, a German shepherd, massive and merciless, erupting from the darkness. He hadn't even seen it coming. One moment he was running, desperate and reckless. The next he was on the ground, ribs cracking, breath stolen from his lungs as the dog pinned him with terrifying strength. The memory sharpened painfully, every detail vivid. The slick feel of rain-slick concrete against his cheek, the snarling growl vibrating through his bones, the hot breath of the animal blasting against his ear. Rage and fear had surged through him then, blinding, primal. He had lashed out without thinking, survival instinct overriding everything else. His hands had found a jagged piece of rebar lying near the curb, slick with rust, and in a wild, desperate arc he had struck the dog across the head. The impact had been sickening, a wet crunch that he still heard in nightmares. The shepherd had yelped, a sound that haunted him more than any scream, and crumpled to the ground motionless. Blaze had stared in horror for a fraction of a second, torn between guilt and the cold animal need to survive, before scrambling to his feet and disappearing into the labyrinth of the city. He had never looked back, never dared to find out what had happened to the animal he had hurt in his frantic escape. Part of him had assumed, had hoped, that it had died quickly, that it hadn't lingered in pain, that it wasn't still out there, carrying the weight of his violence. But now, as he looked into the eyes of the shepherd standing guard beside him, realization clawed its way up from the pit of his stomach and latched onto his throat. The scar across the dog's left ear, barely visible under the matted fur, matched the injury he had inflicted all those years ago. It was the same dog. It had survived, and somehow, impossibly, it had found him again. Blaze reeled, the revelation hitting harder than the crash, harder than any blow he had ever taken in the underground fights he used to scrape by. He stumbled back against the wall of the cabin, sliding down into a sitting position as his legs gave out. His breathing came in short, ragged bursts, his chest tight with a cocktail of shame, disbelief, and something dangerously close to awe. The shepherd watched him in silence, its body touched back. It didn't snarl. It didn't attack. It simply waited, as if giving him the space to confront the ghosts he had tried so hard to outrun. Blaze buried his face in his hands, the rain still hammering down, washing mud and blood from his skin but doing nothing to cleanse the guilt seeping from old wounds. Why? Why save him? He had crippled it, nearly killed it, and yet here it was, dragging his worthless ass out of a burning wreck and shielding him from the men who would drag him back into the darkness. Was it mercy? Duty? Some twisted sense of loyalty born not to him but to some greater, nobler instinct he would never understand? He didn't know. He wasn't sure he wanted to know. Lightning split the sky again through the clearing into stark monochrome relief. Blaze caught movement at the tree-lined shadows darting between trunks, flashlights bobbing like will-o'-the-wisps. The officers were still coming, still hunting, still believing he was nothing more than the criminal the system had labeled him long ago. Blaze wiped his face with a shaking hand, dragging his battered body upright against the cabin wall. He met the shepherd's gaze, and for the first time in a long, long time, he didn't see an enemy staring back. He saw a survivor, a kindred soul, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to make something right for once. The dog stepped closer, nudging his knee with its snout, the contact firm, insistent. Blaze managed a broken laugh, the sound raw and unfamiliar in his throat. "Yeah," he rasped, voice shredded by smoke and emotion. "I get it. Time to move." The shepherd huffed, almost approvingly, and turned back toward the forest, tail low but wagging ever so slightly. Blaze pushed off the wall, biting back a grunt of pain, and limped after it into the dark embrace of the woods. Behind them, the clearing erupted in shouts and beams of light as the officers burst from the trees, weapons drawn, sweeping the area with clinical precision. But Blaze and the shepherd were already ghosts, swallowed by the storm, driven forward by a bond forged in blood and betrayal. Branches tore at his jacket, mud sucked at his boots. Every breath burned like fire in his lungs. But he kept going, the dog a dark shadow ahead of him, leading him deeper into the unknown. As they fled through the rain-soaked wilderness, another memory stirred fainter, older, a promise whispered in the dark to a dying mother. "I'll find my own way, Ma, I swear." For the first time in what felt like centuries, Blaze wondered if maybe, just maybe, that promise hadn't been broken after all. Ahead, the shepherd veered sharply left, barking once, urgent and sharp. Blaze tightened his grip on his shredded jacket and followed without hesitation, heart pounding with something that felt suspiciously like hope. The forest thinned abruptly, the trees pulling back like a curtain to reveal another clearing, this one smaller, more intimate, almost hidden from the eyes of the world. Blaze stumbled through the last curtain of undergrowth, lungs burning, legs trembling with exhaustion. The shepherd always a step ahead, relentless and unwavering. The rain had softened into a steady drizzle now, a ghostly mist rising from the sodden earth, curling around the trees like forgotten spirits. In the center of the clearing stood a figure, solitary and still, silhouetted against the faint glow of a portable floodlight mounted on a police SUV parked nearby. Blaze froze, heart slamming against his ribs, instinct screaming that they had walked straight into a trap. He glanced down at the shepherd, expecting tension, aggression, a signal to run, but the dog had stopped as well, body relaxed yet alert, tail still easy. The man stepped forward slowly, hands raised to show he was unarmed. His uniform was soaked through, the Eastbrook PD patch heavy on his sleeve. But it wasn't his stance that made Blaze's blood run cold. It was his expression. There was no anger, no triumph, no threat etched across the man's weathered face. Only something quieter, heavier, a kind of respect so profound it seemed out of place amid the chaos of the hunt. The officer dropped to one knee in the mud, heedless of the filth soaking into his pants, and bowed his head low, not to Blaze but to the shepherd standing at Blaze's side. The breath caught in Blaze's throat, confusion swirling inside him like a storm. He watched, frozen, as the cop reached out with one shaking hand, not to seize, not to strike, but to gently touch the battered brass badge hanging from the dog's collar. His fingers brushed the metal with a reverence usually reserved for saints or fallen heroes. "Good to see you again, Ghost," the officer whispered, voice hoarse, thick with emotion. Blaze blinked, rain dripping into his eyes, unsure if he had heard correctly. Ghost? Was that the dog's name? It felt wrong and right all at once, like a door creaking open somewhere deep inside his chest. The shepherd Ghost stood perfectly still, allowing the touch, but his eyes remained locked onto Blaze, unreachable and piercing. The officer straightened with effort, brushing mud from his hands, and met Blaze's bewildered stare. "You have no idea, do you?" he said quietly, not with accusation but with something closer to sadness. "You don't know who he is, what he's done." Blaze opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. His throat was too tight, his mind too fractured, his body too battered. All he could do was shake his head, slow and helpless. The officer smiled, but it was a broken thing, a smile built from grief and memory. This dog saved more lives than most men ever will. Officers, civilians, kids. He pulled 3 people out of a burning building during the Turner Street riots, took a bullet protecting his handler during the Eastern District shootout. Hell, they gave him a medal, a ceremony and everything. And then he vanished. The words hit Blaze like hammer blows, each one sinking deeper, twisting the knife already lodged in his gut. He looked down at Ghost again, seeing him not just as the relentless force that had tackled him years ago, not just as the creature that had dragged him from a fiery death hours ago, but as something infinitely larger, infinitely more complex. A warrior, a savior, a survivor. And he had hurt him, betrayed him. The shame was suffocating. Blaze dropped his gaze, unable to meet the dog's eyes anymore. But Ghost wasn't done. The shepherd stepped forward, closing the distance between them with slow, deliberate movements, his paws silent against the wet earth. Blaze braced himself instinctively, expecting teeth, expecting judgment. Instead, Ghost sat heavily in front of him, water streaming from his coat, head tilted slightly as if studying a puzzle too complicated to solve. And then, with a quiet sigh that sounded almost human, Ghost lifted his gaze to meet Blaze's once again. Gone was the fury. Gone was the accusation. What burned in those deep, ancient eyes now was something far more devastating. Sorrow. A sadness so raw, so profound that Blaze felt it strike him physically. A blow that left him gasping for air. It wasn't hatred Ghost carried. It wasn't vengeance. It was mourning for what had been lost, for what could never be reclaimed, for the broken boy who had once swung a piece of rebar in blind terror and broken something sacred between them. Blaze sank to his knees in the mud without thinking, without caring about the pain screaming through his body. His hands trembled as he reached out, stopping inches from Ghost's scarred muzzle. Unsure, unworthy. Tears blurred his vision, hot against the cold rain. "I'm sorry," he rasped, the words torn from him, raw and insufficient. "I'm so damn sorry." Ghost leaned forward slightly, resting his head against Blaze's trembling hand for the briefest, most fragile of moments. A gesture of forgiveness, or perhaps just understanding. It didn't matter. It was enough. A voice crackled over the officer's radio, sharp and urgent. Suspect still on foot. Units closing in. Advise immediate containment. The spell shattered. Blaze jerked his head up, instincts roaring back to life. The shepherd lifted his head, ears swiveling toward the distant noise, muscles tensing for flight. The officer stood, grimacing. "You don't have long," he said. "They're not all gonna ask questions first." Blaze pushed himself upright, pain flaring through every fiber of his being. But he welcomed it now. It was real, it was proof he was still breathing, still fighting. Ghost circled back to his side, bumping his hip lightly, waiting. For a heartbeat, Blaze hesitated, torn between past and future, between chains and freedom. Then, without a word, he nodded once, sharp and decisive. Ghost barked a sharp, cutting sound, and together they turned toward the trees, toward the unknown that beckoned beyond the mist. The storm had finally begun to ebb when Blaze felt the last of his strength give way, his legs folding beneath him as if the bones had simply dissolved into smoke. Ghost barked sharply, but Blaze barely heard it, the world tilting and graying out around him, the steady pulse of pain in his skull drowning out everything else. He was dimly aware of hands grabbing him, rough but not unkind, lifting him onto a stretcher, strapping him down, pushing an oxygen mask over his face as the blurred lights of a medical transport vehicle swirled in his peripheral vision. He tried to fight, tried to sit up, but his body refused, collapsing into the gurney with a final, shuddering breath as the doors slammed shut and the world roared into motion. Inside the cramped, sterile belly of the ambulance, voices floated around him, clipped and professional. Severe head trauma, possible internal bleeding, suspected spinal shock, prep OR just in case. Blaze drifted between the surface and the depths, fragmented images flashing behind his closed eyelids. Ghost's eyes, the officer's bowed head, the sirens screaming into the night. Somewhere along the way a hand slipped into his, grounding him, anchoring him to... Maybe it was Ghost. Maybe it was just the last scrap of his own stubborn soul refusing to let go. When Blaze woke again, he was in a different kind of prison. A hospital room bathed in the too bright antiseptic glow of fluorescent lights. An IV dripped rhythmically at his bedside, and the steady beep of a heart monitor measured each fragile heartbeat. He blinked slowly, disoriented, until a nurse appeared beside him, offering a tired but genuine... "You're lucky," she said gently. "You were out for a long time. Most people wouldn't have survived injuries like that." Blaze tried to speak, but his throat was raw, every word a rasping scrape of sound. The nurse shook her head. "Later," she said. "You need rest. But first there's someone you need to meet." The door opened with a soft whoosh and a man in a dark uniform stepped inside. His face was lined, his posture rigid, but his eyes held no malice. Instead, there was something close to pity lurking there, something that made Blaze's skin crawl with unease. The man pulled up a chair beside the bed, set a thick folder on his lap and sighed. "Jake Bennett," he said, voice low and steady. "Or should I say, John Doe number 72. Blaze frowned, confusion spiking through the fog in his brain. The man continued, flipping open the folder to reveal a sheaf of official-looking paper. "You've been missing for almost 7 years, Bennett. Declared legally dead 3 years ago after no confirmed sightings, no fingerprints, no activity. Your family, what was left of it, held a memorial service. Your file was closed." The words hit Blaze like physical blows. Missing? Dead? He tried to shake his head, to deny it, but the man only tapped a medical report at the top of the stack. "You had a serious head injury back then, closed head trauma resulting in a slow filtering frontal lobe impairment. Likely caused memory distortions, emotional dysregulation, paranoia. You didn't just run from the law, Jake. You ran from yourself." Blaze's hands curled into fists at his sides, nails biting into his palms. Memories flickered and twisted behind his eyes, pieces of a shattered mirror reflecting a story he no longer trusted. Had he really been a criminal? Had he really been hunted down like an animal? Or had the lines blurred somewhere, the truth warped by the fractures in his brain? The officer leaned forward, voice softened. "As the incident at the warehouse, yes, you were involved, but not the way you remember. You weren't the target. You were collateral, caught in the middle of a bust gone sideways. Someone higher up set you up, used you as bait, and when it went bad, you panicked. You fought back. Blaze squeezed his eyes shut, the weight of it almost unbearable. He saw flashes of that night, the chaos, the shouts, the pain. But now the scenes shifted, reframed by the knowledge he hadn't even realized he lacked. He hadn't been the villain, but he hadn't been innocent either. Just a broken man stumbling through a broken world, swinging blindly at ghosts. And ghosts, the officer said quietly, drawing Blaze's gaze back to him. He wasn't trying to hurt you that night. He was trying to protect you. When you struck him down, he wasn't attacking. He was shielding you from the second assailant, the one who was really there to kill you. The floor seemed to drop out from under Blaze. The shepherd's mournful gaze from the clearing, the way he had shielded Blaze from the police, the silent forgiveness in every step they had taken together. It all made a terrible, beautiful kind of sense now. The man stood, gathering the folder in his hands. "You're not under arrest," he said. "Not anymore. Too much time has passed. Too many truths have come to light. But you do have a choice, Bennett. You can disappear again, or you can face it. Face yourself." Blaze barely heard the door click shut behind him. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry wasps in his ears. Hissing. Dead. A ghost clinging to half-formed lies and pain. Outside the small window, the sky had begun to clear, the storm finally giving way to the tentative gray of dawn. The door creaked open again, and Blaze turned his head slowly to see Ghost slip into the room. Wet paws silent on the linoleum, eyes locked on him with an expression that needed no translation. Not judgment, not anger, only a question. And somewhere deep inside, Blaze knew the answer had to come from him. Ghost settled quietly at Blaze's bedside, his heavy body pressed against the sterile hospital floor, his eyes never leaving the man he had once tried to protect and who had unknowingly betrayed him in return. Blaze stared back, through tight, the weight of unfinished truths pressing on his chest harder than any injury. The door swung open again, and at the time a different figure entered. A tall woman with sharp green eyes and a badge that caught the overhead light. She introduced herself briskly as Detective Collins, Eastbrook PD Cold Case Division. But there was something almost gentle about the way she regarded Blaze, as if she understood without needing words that he was not the man their records painted him to be. In her hands she carried a thin, battered manila folder and a small hard drive sealed in an evidence bag. Without preamble, she set the items on the side table and pulled up a chair. "You found something you should see," she said simply, voice steady but weighted with meaning. Blaze sat up straighter, ignoring the scream of torn muscles and fractured ribs, eyes locked onto her face. He didn't trust easily anymore, but something about her, maybe the careful way she stayed just out of arm's reach, maybe the sadness she didn't bother hiding, made him want to listen. Collins powered up the hospital's portable laptop, connected the drive, and opened a grainy video file. This footage was recovered from an old security system 2 blocks from the Turner warehouse, she explained. Corrupted hard drive, assumed lost. But tech dug deeper. They pieced it together last night. The screen flickered, hissed static, then stabilized. Blaze watched, heart pounding, as a scene from another lifetime unfolded in muted colors. A younger version of himself sprinting down a rain-slicked alley, jacket flapping wildly behind him, terror etched into every line of his body. From another angle, a dark figure emerged. Larger, heavier, a pistol flashing in his hand. The man wasn't wearing a badge. He wasn't shouting commands. He was aiming to kill. Then Ghost appeared, a blur of wet fur and fury, launching himself at the armed man with surgical precision, knocking the gun aside. The thug screamed, firing wildly into the air, struggling against the shepherd's relentless assault. Blaze didn't hesitate. He doubled back, grabbed a loose metal pipe and swung it hard, knocking the gun free and driving the attacker to the ground. He kicked the weapon out of reach, knelt beside the stunned dog, hands hovering over the shepherd's trembling form, trying to shield him, to protect him. And that was when the second wave of flashing lights and shouted orders crashed over the alley. Officers burst onto the scene, weapons drawn, faces twisted with adrenaline and panic. To them, the image was clear. Blaze standing over a wounded police canine, bloodied pipe still clutched in his hand, a gun on the ground. They didn't see the shooter Blaze had disarmed, crawling away into the shadows. They didn't see the fear in Blaze's eyes, the desperate, useless attempts to explain. They saw only what they expected to see. They took him down hard, boots slamming into his ribs, fists closing around his wrists, the pipe clattering away into the darkness. The camera angle shifted, lost in the chaos, and the screen froze. Collins paused the footage, giving Blaze a moment to absorb the avalanche of revelation. His saved Ghost, he had fought for him, and the world had punished him for it. He wasn't the villain of that night. He was the scapegoat. The detective's voice cut gently into the suffocating silence. The officer in charge of that op, he was later indicted for corruption, took bribes from both sides of the drug war. He suppressed evidence, buried testimonies. Your file was part of the fallout we never caught in time. Blaze pressed his hands into his face, fingers digging into his temples as if he could force the fragments of his broken life to realign into something that made sense. Ghosts whined softly beside him, nudging his elbow, and Blaze lowered his hands, meeting the shepherd's gaze with new understanding, new grief. You told me I was dangerous, Blaze whispered, voice cracking. They told me I hurt you, that I... He trailed off, shame choking the words. Collins shook her head. You didn't fail him, Bennett, you were failed. By us. Blaze leaned back against the pillows, eyes burning, soul hollowed out by the cruel irony of it all. Every wrong step he had taken since that night, every fight, every theft, every burned bridge had been built on a lie he had known he was living. He wasn't sure whether to rage or weep. Outside, the rain had stopped completely, leaving behind a world scrubbed raw and silent. The detective stood, gathering the folder and the driver. There's more, she said, glancing toward the door as if wary of unseen ears. You need to know the full story. But you're not strong enough yet. Rest, heal. We'll talk soon. Blaze nodded numbly, too drained to do anything else. Collins hesitated, then added, almost as an afterthought, for what it's worth, ghosts never stopped looking for you. The words sliced deeper than any knife. Blaze sat in the sterile, humming quiet long after she left. Ghost pressed against his side like a living anchor to a truth he had spent years running from. His mind spun, not with fear this time, but with questions that had no easy answers. Who had he been before that night? Who could he still become now that the truth was finally clawing its way into the light? The monitor beside him beeped steadily, indifferent to the war raging inside his chest. In the hallway outside, footsteps echoed, heavy and deliberate. Blaze turned his head slowly, heart thudding, as the door handle began to turn. The door swung open slowly, and Blaze tensed automatically, instincts honed by years of suspicion flaring to life. But when he saw who entered, he forced himself to relax, if only slightly. It was Detective Collins again, accompanied by a man in a dark suit, his demeanor cold and calculating, the glint of a badge flashing briefly at his belt. The suit pulled up a chair across from Blaze without invitation, his gaze clinical, measuring. Collins stayed by the door, arms crossed, jaw tight, as if she herself wasn't fully comfortable with what was about to happen. Blaze shifted in the hospital bed, ignoring the dull ache of healing fractures, the restless energy of Ghost radiating from the floor beside him. The suited man spoke first, voice clipped and efficient. The man continued, pulling a slim file from inside his jacket and tossing it onto the tray table with a soft slap. There's a case, sensitive, dangerous. We could use a certain, unique skill set. Blaze raised an eyebrow, glancing briefly at the unopened file before locking eyes with the man again. And what makes you think I'd be interested in helping the people who ruined my life? He rasped, voice still rough from disuse and emotion. The man didn't blink. Because it's a chance to make it right, and because we're not giving you much of a choice. Blaze stiffened, blood boiling. But before he could spit back the fury rising in his chest, Collins stepped forward, her voice cutting across the tension like a blade. It's not blackmail, she said sharply. It's a chance, a real one, clean slate. You help us and you walk away free, no more records, no more shadows. Blaze narrowed his eyes, suspicion warring with the aching, gnawing hunger for redemption he hadn't dared admit even to himself. What kind of help? The suited man opened the file, revealing grainy surveillance photos, maps marked with red circles, profiles of faces that all shared the same cold, dead look of men who had long since crossed every line. There's a trafficking ring operating out of the old industrial quarter. Drugs, weapons, and worse. They move fast, they hide better. We've tried to infiltrate but lost 3 agents already. He flipped another page, revealing a photo of a grimy warehouse, the shadows around it darker than the night itself. We need someone who can think like them, move like them, someone who knows what it's like to be hunted and still survive. Blaze let out a harsh laugh, the sound brittle. You want me to be bait? The suited man smiled thinly. We want you to be the ghost they can't see coming. Blaze leaned back, exhaling slowly, weighing the options that didn't feel like options at all. Before he could answer, Collins added quietly, almost reluctantly, "You won't?" Blaze's gaze snapped to her, the unspoken question hanging heavy in the sterile air. Collins nodded toward Ghost, who stood silently at Blaze's side, every muscle taut, every sense attuned to the unspoken shift in the room. "You'll work with him," Collins said. "Ghost knows the city better than any living cop. He can track, detect, protect. You two already have a history, for better or worse." Blaze stared at the dog, emotions warring inside him. Frustration, guilt, fear, hope. It felt insane, impossible. How could he trust the very creature whose loyalty he had once broken? And yet, looking into Ghost's steady, unwavering gaze, Blaze felt something he hadn't felt in years, an ember of trust reigniting against the suffocating dark. Ghost had saved him, twice, not out of duty, not out of command, but out of something deeper, something neither of them could name. Blaze looked back at the detectives, voice low and ragged but certain. "Why him? Why not just pair me with a human partner?" Collins smiled, but it was a sad smile tinged with things she didn't say aloud. "Because Bennett," she said quietly, "sometimes the only one who can save a broken man is someone who understands exactly what it means to be broken." The words struck like a hammer against the fragile walls Blaze had built around his heart. He closed his eyes briefly, exhaling through clenched teeth. He could say no. He could disappear again, crawl back into whatever gutter or hole had sheltered him all these years. But if he did, then everything Ghost had done would mean nothing. The saving, the searching, the waiting. Blaze opened his eyes, meeting Ghost's gaze with something dangerously close to reverence. He reached out slowly, resting a scarred hand on the shepherd's broad head, feeling the coarse fur under his fingertips, the steady thrum of life and loyalty and a bond reforged in blood. "Come," he said hoarsely. "But we do this my way." The suited man nodded once, brisk and satisfied. "We can work with that." Collins stepped forward, relief flashing across her face. "You'll be briefed tomorrow. Rest tonight. You're going to need it." As the door swung shut behind them, Blaze sat in the dim, humming quiet of the hospital room, his hands still resting on Ghost's head, the future unfolding before him like an uncharted, dangerous road. But for the first time in years, he wasn't running from it. He was walking straight into it, together. The night wrapped itself around the city like a living thing, heavy and restless, pulsing with danger hidden in every shadow. Blaze crouched behind the crumbling brick wall of the abandoned textile mill, his chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths, his body vibrating with adrenaline and focus. The Ghost was at his side, low to the ground, his ears pinned back, his amber eyes locked on the darkened entrance where, inside, a little boy barely 6 years old was being held as leverage by a syndicate that thought itself untouchable. Blaze tightened his grip on the battered pistol tucked into the waistband of his jeans, the cool steel a steadying presence against the storm raging in his veins. This was what they had prepared for, what he and Ghost had trained for in those endless hours since the hospital, pushing pain and Ghosts aside to build something unbreakable between them. This wasn't just a mission, it was a redemption carved from every mistake he had ever made. Through the earpiece, Collins' voice whispered sharp and clicked. 3 armed inside, kids in the center room, minimal lighting, no backup for 5 minutes. Blaze barely nodded, his focus tunneling down to the single truth that mattered. The boy was running out of time. He exchanged a brief glance with Ghost, reading the silent readiness in the dog's coiled muscles, the subtle twitch of his tail. No hesitation, no fear, just a pure, unwavering commitment that had once pulled Blaze out of the fire, out of death itself. Blaze gave a slight hand signal, and Ghost melted into the darkness, a phantom moving with predatory grace toward the side entrance. Blaze counted to 3, muscles coiling, and then he moved, fast and silent, slipping through the broken doorway into the heart of the lion's den. The air inside was thick with dust and mildew, every creak of the rotting floorboards a potential death sentence. Blaze kept low, hugging the shadows, eyes darting for movement, for the glint of a weapon, for the slightest hint of the boy's location. He could hear muffled voices ahead, two men arguing, sharp and angry, the third pacing restlessly. Then a whimper, soft and broken, from behind a stack of rusted machinery. The kid. Blaze's heart clenched painfully, but he shoved the emotion down, channeling it into cold precision. He signaled again, and Ghost slipped around the perimeter, a silent wraith weaving through the debris. They had done this dance a dozen times in training, but this was real, and real meant no second chances. One of the men wandered closer, his silhouette framed against a broken window. Blaze moved without thought, instincts taking over, and brought the man down with brutal efficiency. A quick strike to the throat, a hard pull into the shadows. Silence. Ghost circled, hurting the others unconsciously, driving them into Blaze's path with small, deliberate noises that mimicked the wind and the groaning of the old building. Blaze took down the second with a sweeping kick, disarming him before he could shout, but the third man was faster, meaner, spinning with a snarl and raising his gun toward the faint whimpering behind the machines. The boy. Blaze moved before he even thought, lunging into the open to draw the fire, but Ghost was faster, a streak of muscle and fury that launched itself at the gunman with a savage snarl. The shot rang out, deafening in the enclosed space. Blaze saw it happen as if in slow motion, the muzzle flash, the way Ghost twisted mid-air, the trajectory of the bullet slicing toward the shepherd's exposed flank. Without thinking, without even meaning to, Blaze threw himself forward, shoving Ghost aside with a desperate, brutal shove. The bullet slammed into Blaze's shoulder, spinning him side with a force that tore a scream from his lips. Pain exploded through his body, white-hot and blinding. But even as he hit the ground, he twisted, fired, and watched the third gunman crumple to the floor, his weapon clattering uselessly from his fingers. For a moment there was only silence, broken only by the harsh, ragged panting of Ghost and the soft, terrified sobs of the boy. Blaze tried to push himself up, but his limbs refused, dead weight dragging him toward the floor. Warm blood gushed from his shoulder, pooling beneath him, staining the broken concrete a deep, angry red. Ghost was there in an instant, pressing his body against Blaze's side, whining low in his throat, nudging Blaze's face with desperate urgency. Blaze opened his eyes with effort, his vision blurring at the edges, his body trembling with the effort to stay awake, to stay alive. He managed a weak smile, lifting a hand to tangle his fingers in Ghost's soaked fur. "Good boy," he croaked, voice barely more than a whisper. "You're safe." Ghost leaned closer, resting his forehead gently against Blaze's. And in that moment, something passed between them, something old and sacred and binding. Blaze looked into the dog's eyes, and for the first time, he didn't see a creature built for war, didn't see the ghosts of his failures. He saw a brother, a partner, a reflection of everything he had ever hoped he could be but never believed he deserved. The pain grew distant, muffled, as Blaze felt himself slipping under, dragged toward darkness by invisible hands. But not before he burned Ghost's gaze into his memory, that fierce, unbreakable loyalty shining there, brighter than any star. Not before he understood, deep in his soul, that whatever happened next, he had finally earned it. The world returned to Blaze not with a roar, but with a whisper, the soft beep of a heart monitor, the faint rustle of fabric, the muted murmur of voices in the hallway outside his room. For a long moment he floated in the half-ace between waking and sleep, the pain in his shoulder a dull, distant ache rather than the fiery explosion it had been before. He blinked slowly, the sterile ceiling tiles of the hospital swimming into focus above him, the smell of disinfectant sharp in his nose. As awareness sharpened, Blaze realized there was something warm and heavy resting against his left arm, something breathing, something alive. He turned his head with great effort, the stitches in his body pulling tight, and there he saw Ghost, curled up at his side, his massive head resting across Blaze's forearm, his amber eyes closed in exhausted trust. The sight hit Blaze harder than any bullet ever could have, knocking the breath from his lungs, and for a moment he simply lay there, drinking it in, feeling the impossible reality of it settle into his battered chest. Ghost had stayed. Through everything, through blood and fire and betrayal, the dog had stayed. Tears blurred Blaze's vision, unbidden and unstoppable, and he let them fall without shame, his free hand moving with trembling gentleness to rest atop Ghost's head, fingers sinking into the coarse fur. The shepherd shifted slightly, one ear twitching but didn't wake, the steady rhythm of his breathing a lullaby stronger than any drug. Blaze closed his eyes briefly, overwhelmed by the weight of gratitude, by the quiet, wordless promise that pulsed. A soft knock at the door made him open his eyes again, and Detective Collins stepped into the room, a rare, genuine smile lighting her usually guarded face. In her hands she carried a small velvet box and a folded uniform shirt neatly pressed and waiting. She crossed the room without speaking, setting the box gently on Blaze's chest and the shirt beside him on the bed. Blaze frowned in confusion, his fingers fumbling slightly as he opened the box. Inside, nestled in black velvet, gleamed a polished silver badge, the words engraved so clearly it made his breath catch. K9, Honorary Officer Eastbrook. For a long moment, Blaze could only stare, his heart hammering painfully against his ribs, memories and emotions crashing over him in relentless waves. Collins sat down quietly in the chair beside the bed, her voice soft but steady. "It's not just a token," she said. "It's real. You saved that boy, you saved Ghost, you saved yourself. The department. We talked, we agreed. You earned this. Every scar, every step." Blaze shook his head slowly, disbelief warring with something dangerously close to hope. "I'm not a hero," he rasped, the words tasting bitter after so many years of self-loathing. Collins smiled sadly. "Maybe not the kind you read about in the papers, but the kind that matters." Ghost stirred then, lifting his head to nuzzle Blaze's hand before sitting back on his haunches, tail thumping once against the floor. Blaze looked into those familiar, unwavering eyes and saw reflected there a truth deeper than any words: acceptance, forgiveness, brotherhood. He reached out with trembling fingers and picked up the badge, the cold metal warming almost instantly in his grasp. He turned it over once, feeling the weight of it, the reality of it, the final, undeniable proof that he wasn't who he had once believed himself to be. He was more. He was a fighter, a protector, a man who had fallen and risen and fallen again, but who, against every odd, had finally found his way back. With slow, reverent movements, Blaze fastened the badge to the borrowed uniform shirt, the silver glinting in the dim light. Like a ghost barked once, sharp and proud, and Blaze laughed, a broken, raw sound that morphed into something stronger, something that filled the room with a kind of radiant defiance. He wasn't alone. He never had been. Collins stood, giving him a brief nod of respect. "Rest up, Officer Bennett," she said, a teasing lilt in her voice. "Your partner's going to need you back on your feet soon." Blaze grinned despite himself, the expression foreign and wonderful on his face. He looked down at Ghost, who now sat at full attention, tongue lolling slightly, every inch the proud K9 he was meant to be. Blaze ruffled his fur affectionately. "Your partner," he said softly, voice thick with emotion. "I'm not going anywhere." The light beyond the window was brighter now, the first true rays of morning breaking through the storm clouds, painting the world in shades of gold and hope. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Blaze didn't feel the urge to run. He felt the urge to stay, to build, to fight, not for survival but for something greater, for loyalty, for family, for the second chance Ghost had dragged him kicking and screaming back into. He shifted carefully, settling deeper into the bed, one hand resting lightly on the badge pinned to his chest, the other tangled in Ghost's thick fur. Together, they sat in the quiet sunlight, two broken souls stitched back together not by duty or law, but by something older and stronger and infinitely more true. And somewhere deep inside, where pain had once ruled, Blaze finally found peace. Not because the past had been erased, because he had survived it, because he had been forgiven, because, against all odds, he had come home. If this story moved you even a fraction as much as it moved me writing it, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more powerful journeys like this one. Which moment hit you the hardest? Was it when Blaze shielded Ghost with his own body, or when he finally earned his badge? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, your city, your country, It means the world to know how far these stories can travel.